Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're starting a brand new book, Volume 8. We're studying chapters 1 through 10 today. The title of this book is The Foremost Householder. This is a collection of teachings from Gotama Buddha where he's sharing with you teachings to help a household practitioner be able to get to enlightenment. This is part of the Words of the Buddha, the Path to Enlightenment, Revealing the Hidden Book series, where there's 13 volumes of books, all based on the original words of the Buddha. You can download these books at no cost by going to buddhadailywisdom.com, and you'll be able to see the links there under free books to be able to then download each of the individual 13 books of the book series that are the original words of the Buddha. You're welcome to take those books and go print them, or you can order them in printed version or Kindle version through Amazon if you have access to Amazon in your country. So I'd like to welcome all of you to today's class and invite you to study along with us the words of the Buddha here using this book, The Foremost Householder, Volume 8 of this book series. The way that I conduct our classes, I will typically start with a meditation, but considering the length of the chapters today, we're just going to go right into actually studying the individual chapters. And the way that I do this is I will typically ask for a volunteer. If there's someone in Zoom who would like to read the individual chapters, you can read the chapters. Then I will share some teachings on those and then open up to any and all questions that you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can put your questions in the comment section. I'll be able to see that and then answer any questions that you might have. And if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand to ask any questions or follow-up questions. And if you'd like to read you're in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically, and then I'll be able to call on you to have you read any of the chapters that you like. So I'm just going to switch over to show and display the book so that everyone will be able to see that no matter where you're joining, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you'll be able to see the book. So we'll start with this first chapter, which is titled, Household Life is Crowded and Dusty. Remember, these are the words of the Buddha. So here, I will go ahead and read this unless someone in Zoom decides they would like to volunteer at any point. So the title is Household Life is Crowded and Dusty. Monks, here a Tathagata appears in the world, accomplished, fully enlightened, perfect in true wisdom and conduct, superb, knower of worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, fortunate. He declares this world with its gods, its maras, and its brahmas, this generation with its ascetics and brahmins, its princes and its people, which he has himself realized with direct knowledge, experience. He teaches the teachings good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing, and he reveals a holy life that is entirely perfect and pure. A householder, or householder's son, or one born in some other clan hears these teachings. On hearing the teachings, he acquires confidence in the Tathagata. Possessing that confidence, he considers thus: household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy while living in a home to lead the holy life entirely perfect and pure as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. okay, this is a teaching from the Buddha discussing essentially how household life is much more challenging to be able to get to enlightenment than in the ordained life. And this is true during the lifetime of the Buddha. It's also true nowadays as well. But the difference between the lifetime of the Buddha and now is quite significant. During the lifetime of the Buddha, household practitioners spent a fair amount of time just attending to their basic needs and basic necessities. They had to carry water very long distances multiple times throughout the week, and sometimes spending maybe even an entire day just to bring water to their home for 2 or 3 days' time. They spent a lot of time cultivating food and crops and developing food, and even like basic necessities like clothing and things like this were very challenging. So the household practitioners spent a lot of time just attending to their basic needs. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was much more challenging for a household practitioner to get to enlightenment because they didn't have as much time to spend learning the teachings, practicing, training their mind through meditation and things like this. They were occupied with a lot of other tasks. Nowadays, I would say that it's much easier for a household practitioner to get to enlightenment than it was during the lifetime of the Buddha, because we've invented a lot of modern conveniences that didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. For example, we don't need to carry water in most places back and forth in order to get running water into our home. We just walk over to a faucet and turn it on. This is a huge improvement, which created much more time in our life. We also have mastered food systems, educational systems, clothing, things like this are all readily available to us as household practitioners. So we're not having to spend as much time to attend to our basic needs and necessities as we once did. This is why we tend to have a lot of time to do things that are maybe not so beneficial in our life. An individual might spend many hours of a day searching social media or playing on YouTube or doing other things that really aren't necessarily providing significant benefit in their life. So as you start clearing out more and more of the erroneous things in your life that aren't really beneficial, you'll find that you have more time for studying the teachings of the Buddha and doing things like meditation or seeking guidance with the teacher to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment. Here, the Buddha is referring to himself as the Tathagata. This is the way that the Buddha often referred to himself, which means one who shares the truth or one who has discovered the truth. This is the way he tended to refer to himself. So here at the beginning of this discourse, he's referring to himself as being this teacher and this individual who's able to teach and tame individuals to be able to get to enlightenment. Notice here that the Buddha is referring to gods. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they believed in many different gods. So the Buddha needed to teach about these different gods in order to help people to understand that it isn't God that's going to determine whether or not you get to enlightenment or not. It's based on your own individual decisions. But he didn't place God as a central figure in his teachings because God's not the one who determines whether or not you get to enlightenment or not. But he did need to teach about it because God is a being that's in the cycle of rebirth, and you'll see various teachings from him in this book series where he is teaching about God. This is a big misunderstanding in the Buddhist world where a lot of people think that the Buddha didn't teach about God. You might even see people say that the Buddha rejected God, but this isn't actually true. The Buddha taught about gods. He even taught about Mara. Mara is a unwholesome being that is interested in causing calamity in the world and looks to influence unwholesome decisions and unwise decisions that would lead to unwholesome results. So he talked about these types of things during his teachings, but he never made them a central role because it's really up to you to be able to cultivate wisdom in the mind to then be able to train the mind and move forward with making wise decisions that would produce wholesome results in your life. Then he goes on and he talks about himself teaching the teachings that are good in the beginning, the middle, and the end, with the right meaning and phrasing, revealing the holy life that is entirely perfect and pure. The Buddha taught this way, and he also encouraged other people to teach this way, that your discourses as a teacher, it shouldn't start off good and then kind of like fade away over time, or it shouldn't start off, lackluster and then kind of build over time, but it should be sustained. An individual should be able to sustain their energy throughout a discourse and ensure that their teachings are interesting and helpful in the beginning, the middle, and the end, and using the right meaning and phrasing, or accurate meaning and phrasing. Because as we've moved the teachings of the Buddha into a new language like English or other languages around the world, it's very important that we choose the precise words in the meaning and the phrasing that is going to accurately describe the teachings, because this is going to help individuals to be able to get to enlightenment. Where if we're not attentive to the types of meaning and phrasings that we're using in our discourses and our books and the way that we're describing the teachings of the Buddha, this is going to lose the meaning of the actual teachings, and the students aren't going to be able to understand them to be able to develop their mind. And the same thing is, if we didn't have teachings that were good in the beginning, middle, and end, a student would lose interest in the teachings over the period of time of your discourse. So by maintaining the right meaning and phrasing and being attentive to what words you're choosing during discourses and writing books and things like that, and ensuring that it's good in the beginning, middle, and end, a student can be interested in understanding the teachings, and then they'll get the penetrating language that reveals the path to enlightenment, the entirely perfect and pure path to enlightenment, or as the Buddha is describing here, revealing the holy life. Then the Buddha is explaining that an individual, having heard his teachings and understanding his teachings, they will start to develop confidence in the Buddha, because as you investigate and examine his teachings, you independently verify those for yourself, and then as you practice them, you see the truth for yourself, that is leading to an improved condition of your mind, an improved condition of your life. Because as you're eliminating anger and sadness and frustration and other discontent feelings, and your peacefulness and joy is arising in the mind, you'll be able to see that the condition of the mind is gradually improving, and your relationships in your personal and professional life are improving as well. So one will start to develop this confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to actually attain enlightenment. And then lastly, he does talk about how household life is crowded and dusty. What he's talking about here is very challenging to get to enlightenment, where going into becoming ordained or life gone forth is wide open. Because when you ordain, you're in the womb of the monastery, for example. A woman's womb is the perfect place for a fetus to grow and develop. And the same thing is, if you ordain, you're letting go of so many things in worldly life that you now enter into an environment that should be the perfect environment for an individual to grow and develop, if the teachings of the Buddha, based on the original words of the Buddha, are being shared in that environment, and you actively apply effort and energy to learn and practice the teachings, you're now in a perfect environment that's very conducive for you to be able to get to enlightenment. But not everybody's going to choose to be ordained. So it's possible to get to enlightenment through living a household life. There's just certain things that you need to learn and be attentive to that isn't necessarily the case during the ordained lifestyle. So for example, in the ordained lifestyle, you don't have a house, a car, a life partner, you don't have children, you don't really have a significant amount of money that's maybe coming in, and various things like this that you need to pay attention to. So in the ordained life, you've let go of a lot of worldly possessions, and now you have a bowl and 2 robes, essentially, is what you have. In the household life, you're going to have various possessions and relationships, and you need to learn how to have possessions and be able to acquire possessions and use those to your benefit without craving, desire, attachment, as well as relationships. You're going to need to learn, if you're going to choose to have a life partner, or you're going to maintain contact with your family and friends, you need to learn how to cultivate the wisdom to love without attachment, understanding true love and how to love unconditionally without having expectations and forcing people or putting your bitterness or hostility out on top of them where it damages your relationships. So there's a lot of wisdom that you need in the household life to be able to then train the mind to navigate the world with possessions and having a career, having relationships that a ordained practitioner doesn't have. There's pros and cons to both, or there's benefits and challenges to both. In the ordained life, you're fully able to spend a significant amount of time to learn and practice and develop the teachings and develop your practice, and you might have access to individuals who can share the teachings in a way that a household practitioner might not. You have kind of living in a group of people that are potentially very motivated and encouraged to be able to learn and practice. Where in the household life, you need to be able to seek this out. You need to find a teacher. You need to find resources. You also need to have a certain amount of inner discipline and determination and dedication and diligence to developing your practice. So some of those things are built into the ordained life, but also being ordained isn't a guarantee that you're going to get to enlightenment. You still have obstacles and challenges that you need to overcome, just like in the home life, in the household life. In the household life, you have a bit more freedom, but also with that freedom comes a lot more temptation. So you need to be able to manage that and observe that and then make wise decisions. And there's some people who might choose to ordain and then unordain, or they might choose to ordain and be there, for the rest of their life. But either way, it's important to spend time throughout your day, your week, your month, where you're developing your practice, you're training your mind regularly with meditation, and you're learning about the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment so that you can move to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. Let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's move on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled Paying Homage to the Six Directions. And again, I'll just extend an invitation out to anybody in Zoom. If you guys would like to read at any point, just raise your hand electronically and you guys can go ahead and read chapters. This one starts off with an individual talking to the Buddha. He says, "Well, Venerable Sir, how should one pay respect to the six directions according to the noble discipline? It would be good if the perfectly enlightened one were to teach me the proper way to pay homage or respect to the six directions according to the noble discipline." So before I move on, let me just explain what's happening here. During the lifetime of the Buddha, and even now, in the region of the world that the Buddha was from, they were practicing various rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship based on Hindu teachings and other teachings that existed at the time. So there was this kind of practice of paying homage in the six directions of the compass. This is north, south, east, west, and then up and down. And now this individual, having been practicing the rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that were going on at the time, is asking the Buddha, how can I practice this similar thing, but based on your teachings rather than these rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship? Because the Buddha didn't teach any rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship. So this individual is seeking guidance from the Buddha about how to develop their practice, but still maintaining this respect in the six directions of the compass. So now the Buddha explains to him, "Young householder, it is by abandoning the four defilements of action, by not doing evil from the four causes, by not following the six ways of wasting one's substance, through avoiding these 14 evil ways, that the noble disciple covers the six directions, and by such practice becomes a conqueror of both worlds, so that all will go well with him in this world and the next. And at the breaking up of the body after death, he will go to a good destination, a heavenly world." Here the Buddha shares, what are the four defilements of action that are abandoned? Taking life is one. Taking what is not given is one. Sexual misconduct is one. False speech is one. These are the four defilements of action he abandons. Now let me just kind of teach as I go along here, since I'm the one reading. I think it's a lot easier if I just teach you as I'm reading. So here, one of the things to understand is that the Buddha is setting up his discourse. This is the way he tends to do it. He's going to tell you what he's going to tell you. Then he's going to tell you. Then he's going to tell you what he told you. This is a process that even today we say is very wise, that the Buddha discovered on his own 2,500 years ago. He's going to tell you what he's about to tell you. Then he's going to tell it to you. Then he's going to tell you what he told you. This is a process that he uses. And here he's telling you all the things that he's going to explain as part of his discourse. And then he sums it up here where he says, this will help you go to a good destination, to a heavenly world. Well, The same things that lead to a heavenly rebirth are the same things that lead to enlightenment as well. The goal of the teachings of the Buddha is not to be reborn in heaven. The goal of the teachings of the Buddha is to train the mind, get to enlightenment, and escape the whole cycle of rebirth. Getting to a heavenly rebirth means you're still in the cycle of rebirth, you still haven't gotten to enlightenment, and in that heavenly rebirth, those beings are experiencing exclusively pleasant feelings and oftentimes lack diligence and dedication. They're oftentimes complacent in learning and practicing the teachings to get to enlightenment, so they're oftentimes born into other realms besides the heavenly realm. They can even be reborn into the hell, the animal realm, afflicted spirits, or back into the human world. The Buddha never used rebirth in any of the realms as a way to guilt, shame, or fear you into learning his teachings. He's just explaining to you the natural laws so that you understand and you can make wise decisions on your own. So here, he's explaining that these things that he's about to share do lead to a good destination on your next rebirth, a heavenly world, but also these are the exact same things that lead to enlightenment as well, because it's helping you to extinguish the pollutions of mind and your unwise decision making that leads to unwholesome karma or unwholesome results. So these first four that he's talking about, these are actually directly from the 5 precepts. If you've ever studied the 5 precepts, he gives a lot more detail in the 5 precepts related to these particular teachings. Here, he just is pointing to it. Rather than re-explain the 5 precepts over and over and over again, he's just summarizing it and pointing to it. So if you go look at the 5 precepts in detail, he gives much more illuminating language than just what he's sharing here. This is just kind of a placeholder or pointing to the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts with much more illuminating language will fully help you to understand how to practice and eliminate these 4 defilements or these 4 pollutions or taints of action. Because as long as you're doing any of these things, you're causing harm to other beings, and this harm is going to come back to you. So it would be very challenging for you to experience a peaceful and joyful mind if you're causing harm to others, because you're going to constantly be experiencing harm coming back to you. What are the 4 causes of evil from which refrain? Evil action springs from craving. It springs from anger or ill will. It springs from ignorance, unknowing of true reality. It springs from fear. If the noble disciple does not act out of craving, anger, ignorance, or fear, he will not do evil from any one of the 4 causes. So here, the Buddha is explaining the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 fires, along with fear, is what motivates unskillful conduct. And he also explains when he teaches about the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, which karma is just the results of your decisions, that it's craving, anger, and ignorance that leads to all unwholesome karma or unwholesome results in your life. So your goal in this path to enlightenment is to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. These are kind of a high-level way to describe the defilements or the pollutions or the taints in the mind, where the 10 fetters are describing the individual pollutions, much more detailed. But all of those 10 fetters bubble up to craving, anger, and ignorance. So here you would need to understand what these pollutions are and how to eliminate them, which I teach as part of our foundational programs and courses and retreats to help you understand the 3 poisons and how to actually eliminate them. And then by doing so, you will also eliminate fear as well. But there's specific things you can do to go in and eliminate fear, which I teach as part of Volume 1, Chapter 17 in the group learning program and in that first volume. Then here's the next thing the Buddha shares. And which are the 6 ways of wasting one's substance that he does not follow? Addiction to strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, is one way of wasting one's substance. Haunting the streets at unfitting times is one. Attending fairs is one. Being addicted to gambling is one. Keeping unwholesome company is one. Habitual idleness is one. And how, householder's son, does the noble disciple protect the 6 directions? These 6 things are to be regarded as the 6 directions. The east denotes mother and father. The south denotes teachers. The west denotes wife and children. The north denotes friends and companions. The nadar, which is down below you, denotes servants workers, and helpers. The zenith, which is up, denotes ascetics and Brahmins. Okay, so here the Buddha is talking about wasting one's substance. Well, wasting one's substance is there's a certain vitality or a certain vigor that one has, a certain ability to produce success in your life. So if you're wasting your substance, you're wasting your vigor and your ability to be successful in life. So addicted to strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, is going to waste your vigor or your substance that could lead to an improved life. Because if you're addicted to drugs and intoxicants, substances that cause heedlessness, this is producing a certain amount of unalertness, unattentiveness, or unmindfulness, unawareness of mind. That's walking in the exact opposite direction of enlightenment. If you're looking to get to enlightenment, you need to promote mindfulness in the mind, which is awareness of mind, where you have attentiveness and alertness, because you need to be able to observe the unwholesome qualities in the mind and eliminate those. And you need to be able to observe the wholesome qualities in the mind and support those, encourage those, and don't allow them to fade. But if you're taking substances that cause heedlessness, you're not going to have this mindfulness and this ability to either eliminate certain unwholesome qualities or cultivate wholesome qualities. Therefore, you're wasting your vigor or your substance, your ability to produce success in the world. Same things with haunting the streets at unfitting times. This would be like going out at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning to just kind of like tromp around town and do unwise things. If you've ever done these things, or you've been involved in these things, or you know people that have, in the nighttime hours like that, oftentimes a city becomes a very different place. If you're looking to walk towards the light, you would like to go out in the daylight hours. In the evening hours, oftentimes a city becomes a very different place. No matter how peaceful that particular city is, oftentimes people who are into unwise things or unwholesome things will come out in the nighttime hours. Not that we're judging individuals who choose to go out at nighttime. I used to do these things. I definitely used to haunt the streets at unfitting times at different times in my life. But what you would like to do in order to walk towards the light and make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results is to choose to go out when people are into wholesome things. Whereas if you're going out at really late at night like that to haunt the streets, then you're going to be experiencing unwholesome results, because there's a lot of unwholesomeness that's going on at that time of day. Attending fairs. This is something that happened during the lifetime of the Buddha for entertainment. Essentially, that's the only entertainment they really had during the lifetime of the Buddha. So attending fairs in the lifetime of the Buddha, meaning that you're attached or craving for entertainment, would be wasting one's substance. Today, we might say that searching and playing on social media for 6 hours without any real benefit would be wasting one's substance. Or if you were just binge watching television for many hours at a time, this would be wasting one's substance. Where during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was tending fairs. Where nowadays we have fairs and festivals that are very educational and are wise for people to maybe potentially partake in. Maybe you go with your family and it's a social event where you can build relationships with others. But mainly what he's talking about here is being addicted or craving or clinging to entertainment and just chasing after that without any kind of restraint. Being addicted to gambling, of course, this is going to waste one's substance, because as you make an income and you are using that income to sustain your life and provide for basic necessities like food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical care, if you're gambling, you're going to find yourself not being able to support yourself or your family based on having gambled away your money. So this would waste your substance after spending all that hard-earned time and effort to be able to now acquire your income. Why would you be interested in gambling it away? Instead, use it for something beneficial. Keeping unwholesome company is one. This is who you choose to associate with. If you choose to associate with people that are into unwholesomeness, your mind will tend to be influenced by that, and you're wasting your substance. So the Buddha always encouraged people to associate with wholesome individuals. And again, you're not judging someone as being unwholesome or bad or anything like that, but you're just looking at wise decision making. that one of the examples that I typically give is that if you have a friend, say from childhood, that you guys have always been friends, and then over time, maybe they got into selling drugs or something like this, and now you're just clinging to this relationship for 20 or 30 years. And now maybe you guys are riding in the car together, you know they sell drugs, but you just hang out with them because it's a relationship you had from childhood, and maybe you don't even get involved in the drugs or anything like that. But if you get pulled over by a police officer and they have drugs on them and they slip it under your chair, you're now going to be affected by that in a negative way. So it would be unwise to associate with unwholesome individuals because you're going to be affected by your decision to associate with those individuals. That's the unwise decision that you're making that's leading to unwholesome results. And then habitual idleness. This is essentially being complacent and lethargic, where you're not really applying effort and energy towards improving your life. Whereas if you were habitually idle, where you weren't applying dedication and diligence to growing and developing and evolving as an individual, developing your skills and abilities, this would waste away your substance. So sitting around and not really attending to the duties and activities and developing your mind, it would be habitual idleness, and you're not interested in that. So you need to find this middle way where you're not chasing and nose to the grindstone, but you don't have this habitual idleness either, so that you gradually work towards certain goals and objectives that you have, filtering in some entertainment and time with friends and family, filtering in some rest and relaxation and some time for yourself as well. This would be a wise way to conduct your life. Then the Buddha is starting to set up these 6 directions where he talks about these different relationships, whether it's your mother and father, teachers, wife and children, which you could also associate that with husbands. If somebody has a husband, you can use these same teachings in that situation. Friends and companions. Here he talks about servants, workers, and helpers. Here you might think about that as employees, people who are contributing to your success. And then ascetics and Brahmins are people who are sharing the teachings of the Buddha in order to help you to progress, or any kind of wholesome teachings that are there to help you to evolve as a human being. I'm not going to go through each one of these individually, but I'll explain to you what he's teaching and how he's teaching it, so that then you can investigate these teachings yourself in Volume 8, Chapter 2. What he's essentially doing is he's saying, okay, if you practice these 5 things, then what you could potentially experience as part of the natural law of karma is these 5 things. So he's saying, okay, for your parents, having been supported by your parents, you should aim to support them and help them in life. And you will perform their duties for them, meaning you will help them, right? You'll carry bags for them if they have some work or efforts, things that you can do to help them, that you contribute to the work that they have. This would be a way for you to give back to your parents and help them. During the lifetime of the Buddha, it was common that if your family had a certain craft or a certain business, that you would essentially maintain that same tradition or that same craft or business. This is how your family built up your karma and became very successful in the community. Whereas if your mother or your father was into a particular trade, you would just continue that and you would take on that same trade. Where nowadays we tend to go off and do our own things. We don't necessarily do the exact same thing as our parents. Here, the Buddha is saying, I will be worthy of my heritage. This is like your family's reputation, that if your family has this really helpful reputation and beneficial reputation in the community, you will be worthy of that and you will uphold the reputation of your family. And then after my parents' death, I will distribute gifts on their behalf. What the Buddha is explaining here is that when an individual has somebody close to them, like your parents, die, oftentimes an individual can be grieving and be sad prior to enlightenment. If the mind is enlightened, you wouldn't grieve and be sad, because it's not love that's causing the grief and sadness, it's the craving, desire, attachment. So if there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, there will be grief at the time of death. And one of the ways to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment is to practice generosity. Also, breathing mindfulness meditation is there for you as well. So if you find yourself grieving your parents' death, or really anybody's death, you could distribute gifts and practice generosity as a way to uplift the mind and let go of the craving, desire, attachment. And that's why he's teaching that here. And then he's saying, okay, now that you've done these things, what you'll notice is that your parents will essentially do these things. And this isn't a requirement, this isn't an expectation, this isn't a rule or a commandment. This is just the natural law of karma, of the way things work. That if you do those first five, the Buddha is helping you to see that these are the things that will tend to happen. And you shouldn't have an expectation that these things are going to happen, because that's setting yourself up to fail. Whenever you're doing something, when you're practicing some wise decision, you should just practice that wise decision without any expectation of anything in return. But it does help to understand the natural law of karma, so that as these things are happening, you understand why. That there's a cause and effect, there's an action and result. There's certain actions that you took that led to these things occurring. And here with parents, he's saying they will restrain you from evil, they will support you in doing good, they will teach you a skill, they will find a suitable wife or life partner. This is something that transpired during the lifetime of the Buddha, is families would help you to find a life partner. Nowadays, more and more people are looking for their own life partner and just kind of introducing them to their family rather than asking their family to help them find a partner, which does happen in some cultures, but more and more people are just finding their own partners, and parents are making space for the children to do that, which is wise. And then in number 5, in due time, hand over his inheritance to him. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, they would hand over the inheritance before they died. So the parents would have some money or some assets or something accumulated during their lifetime, and they would hand it over to their children before they died. And then those assets would sometimes be used in order to help support the parents as well. As they were getting closer and closer to the end of life, they would need their children to be able to support them. So this is why they would hand over their inheritance prior to their death. Where nowadays we might have wills and different documents that allow that to transpire, where during that lifetime they didn't have those things. So the rest of this discourse is essentially the same thing, but with different relationships. This one, to the southerly direction, is about teachers, about how it would be wise for you to choose to treat a teacher, and then as a result, your teacher will choose to do these things. It's just the natural law of karma. The teacher doesn't even have to read this or know this, that if you treated your teacher in the way that the Buddha is describing here, then what you will notice is, because of the natural law of karma, these things will tend to occur. And then the same thing with any kind of life partner or children that you might have. The Buddha is describing that here. And then friends and companions. Then also he's describing employees. And then he's describing individuals who are sharing teachings based on the holy life and explaining to you how to conduct yourself in those situations. So you can read this, which are the words of the Buddha, and then you have words from me to be able to help you understand this as well. So let me know what questions you guys might have on this chapter. Again, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be able to see that and then answer any questions that you guys might have. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any other questions or comments. So I'm going to move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is repaying one's mother. Oh, I see Koshi has a question. Go ahead, Koshi.
Yeah, I can read this for you, so I was raising my hand.
Oh, perfect. Go for it. This is a great chapter.
Okay. Yeah, repaying one's mother and father. Monks, there are two persons that cannot easily be repaid. What two? One's mother and father. Even if one should carry about one's mother on one shoulder and one's father on the other, and while doing so, should have a lifespan of 100 years, live for 100 years, and if one should attend to them by anointing them with balms, by massaging, bathing, and rubbing their limbs, and gave and void their urine and excrement there, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have repaid them. Even if one were to establish one's parents as the supreme lords and rulers over this great earth, abounding in the 7 treasures, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have repaid them. For what reason? Parents are of great help to their children. They bring them up, feed them, and show them the world. But monks, when parents lack confidence, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in confidence. If when one's parents are unwholesome, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in virtuous behavior, moral conduct. If one, when one's parents are selfish, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in generosity. If when one's parents are unwise, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in wisdom. In such a way, one has done enough for one's parents, repaid them, and done more than enough for them.
All right. Thank you, Kushi. So here, the Buddha is talking at the beginning, and you can visualize this, right? That if you carried your mother on one shoulder and you carried your father on another shoulder and you lived for 100 years, and in doing so you massaged them, you bathed them, you rubbed their limbs, you cleaned up their urine and their feces, that the Buddha is saying you still haven't done enough to repay your parents for all that they've done. And he even goes in and says, if you establish your parents as the supreme lords and rulers with this amazing wealth, essentially providing them all these material objects, you still haven't repaid your parents enough. And then he says, for what reason? Because parents are of great help to their children. They bring them up, feed them, and show them the world. So essentially, our parents help to sustain our life and bring us into this world. Getting into a human birth is the most ideal birth that you could ever get to, because now you have an opportunity to get to enlightenment from this human birth. Where in the heavenly birth, you also have the opportunity to get to enlightenment there. But as you heard me share, it's oftentimes not the case because beings are oftentimes complacent. But here in the human realm, we have all the perfect conditions in which to motivate us and encourage us to be able to get to enlightenment, because we experience not only pleasant feelings, but painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant feelings as well. So there's this debt of gratitude that we should have in this appreciation for our parents, even if we didn't agree with the way our parents did certain things in our life, because I haven't really met too many people that agreed with 100% of the things their parents ever did in their life. Of course, you're going to have certain expectations and cravings, wanting your parents to be a certain way. And there's a good chance that you didn't agree with certain things that your parents did as you were growing up as a child. So those are just your craving, desire, attachment. So you might have gotten angry or frustrated at your parents at different times because you disagreed with what they did and you had certain expectations of them. But nonetheless, they did bring you into this world, helping you to come into the world, especially your mother. Having you in her stomach for 9 months is very challenging. And to go through labor pains and birthing and all of that, it's very significant and very impactful for a woman to carry a child and then deliver it. So there's this debt of gratitude that we should always remind ourselves about, even if we didn't agree with the things that our parents did in our life. So there's situations where you might notice that you have more wisdom, or you might have certain understanding of the path to enlightenment that your parents don't have. And as you become more and more awake and you become more enlightened, you might see that your parents are really struggling in the world. And the Buddha is essentially saying, when you see that occurring, then you can essentially aim to help them to be able to then develop on the path to enlightenment. But keep in mind, you need to be very skillful when you're doing this, because oftentimes a parent's mind might have a certain amount of ego and they look at you as a child, and if you started to just teach them, it could be very challenging for your relationship. You need to remain humble when you're doing this. And the Buddha gives you 4 things to be aware of, and as you see these things, he gives you solutions to be able to help. He talks about when your parents are lacking confidence. Lacking confidence is when they lack confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, or the community. And where you see this, you can just kind of gradually, skillfully share things here and there that help your parents. So if your parents over a period of time are noticing that you're becoming more peaceful and more joyful, they might comment to you like, wow, you're so much more joyful than you used to be. You might just say, yeah, that's the teachings of the Buddha. I've been learning those and practicing those. They really work. You might consider learning them at some point, right? You can just kind of leave it at that. Just something simple. So that's encouraging, settling, and establishing them in confidence. And there's certain ways that you could potentially do that. You might even give them a book of the teachings of the Buddha, or invite them to a class or a retreat or something like that. When one's parents are unwholesome, the Buddha is saying that you try to encourage, settle, and establish them in virtuous behavior. So if you see your parents are into drugs or alcohol or having other difficulties in life with their moral conduct, maybe they're lying or stealing or things like this, you might decide to try to help them to establish virtuous moral conduct, which requires you to be humble when you're doing that. If you notice that your parents are selfish, you might encourage and settle and establish them in generosity, because this is going to help them eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So if your parents are holding on to their material wealth very tightly, you might encourage them to practice generosity and practice giving and sharing their time, their effort, their energy, and their resources without any expectation of anything in return. And then also, if you notice that your parents are unwise and making unwise decisions, you might try to establish them in wisdom. And the Buddha is saying, having done these 4 things, then you've done enough. Because if you had the option of pressing this button and your parents would stay angry and hateful or bitter or discontent, maybe frustrated or guilty or shameful or bored or lonely, and if you could press that button, they would stay that way for the rest of their life. Or you could press this button and now they would be peaceful and joyful for the rest of their life. I think that the vast majority of children would press the button where their parents could be peaceful and joyful for the rest of their life. Well, it's not pressing a button. You can't press a button to create that, but establishing them in confidence and moral conduct and generosity and in wisdom is what will help lead to their peacefulness and joy. So that's the way to repay your parents for this debt of gratitude that one might have as part of being brought into the world. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with how your parents brought you up, they did help you get to this point where you can sustain your life. And now as an adult, you're able to make wise decisions for your own life. So no matter what they did, they still at least gave you food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical care to a certain degree that you were able to then sustain your life. And of course, nowadays, there's some situations where a parent might have been very abusive and you might decide to completely go away from your parents. And that's a decision that you've made. And maybe you've decided you're never going back. Maybe they've physically abused you, verbally abused you, or maybe sexually abused you. And if that's your case, that you're never going to go back and see your parents ever again, then you can be at peace with that, because it might be unwise for you to go back and enter into that relationship. But at least if you can train your mind to eliminate any anger or hatred or ill will towards your parents, because holding on to that is only going to harm you, so that you can at least get to this point of appreciation and gratitude for at least the fact that they allowed you to be able to sustain your life, and now you have this opportunity to get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have. Again, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom you can raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. Looks like we have a question here coming in on Zoom. This is from Francis. What should we do if parents don't respond positively to our sharing of the Dhamma, still very stubborn to old ways of life? So what I suggest you do is that you try 2 or 3 times over the course of maybe a year or so. And if they are not interested to learn and practice, then just choose to no longer share with them. Because the Buddha here isn't telling you to force your parents. He's not telling you to have craving, desire, attachment to try to convince your parents to learn and practice. He's just saying where you observe that they're having challenges with these 4 areas, then you try to help them. But if you kept pushing and pushing and pushing, then that's your craving, desire, attachment. Also, I would encourage you to be aware of labeling your parents as stubborn, because this is kind of like judging them, and this is like looking down on them and labeling them as being stubborn. Instead, just understand that their mind is craving. There's a certain amount of clinging to the old way of life and their old way of doing things. This is due to the unknowing of true reality, or that confusion, that misunderstanding, that ignorance. So rather than think of them as stubborn, which kind of takes a bit of a negative connotation, just change your perspective and have concern for their misfortune, which is compassion. Just have compassion for them and have loving kindness, where you have this genuine interest in seeing them be well, but you understand them being well is based on their decisions. You can't force them to make decisions that would improve their life. Only they can choose to do that. And they may need to be reborn. This is just the way that things happen, is that Not every being in this particular lifetime is going to choose to learn and practice these teachings, and they may need to be reborn more times in order to get to the point where they're able to learn and practice these teachings. And that's okay. That's what they've been experiencing their whole life, throughout multiple lives. And if they need to be reborn more, then okay, that's what they experience. If they are continuing to be frustrated and irritated and annoyed, okay, that's what they're experiencing. That's their karma. But in order for you to get to peacefulness and joy, you're going to need to eliminate any craving or clinging, any expectation you have of wanting your parents to learn and practice the teachings. But where possible, you can just lightly help them. And if you've tried 2 or 3 times and they just haven't taken to the teachings, then what the Buddha is sharing here is you've done enough for your parents. So he's not guiding you to force your parents. He's just saying that you should try to help them where you can. And then where you've done that, you've done enough. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions on Facebook or YouTube. So let's go ahead and move to the next chapter, which is chapter 4. Oh, it looks like Francis is saying something else. So just see things as they are, just so be with it. Yes, exactly. So you try it, you try to help your parents, and if they don't take to the teachings, then okay, so be it. That's their life, that's their decision. You've attempted to help them, but just let it go. That's the middle way. Whereas if you did nothing to help your parents and you were just working towards getting better and better, and you're learning all these things and you never tried to help them, you wouldn't feel comfortable there. But also, if you chase and force and crave and long and yearn to help them, your mind's not going to be peaceful there either. So the middle way is you try 2 or 3 times perhaps, and then if they don't take to the teachings and they're just disinterested, then okay, just understand that any kind of unwholesome results that they experience in life is a result of their decisions. There were times where I was helping my mom during her life, and she knew that I would help her, and she would see that the things I was sharing were very helpful, but she wouldn't do what I suggested. There were even times where she would come to me for advice, and she would ask me questions, and then I would give her advice, and she would say, David, I know your advice is right on, and every time you've ever given me advice, it's been very accurate, but just to let you know, I'm not going to do what you suggested. And I said, okay, that's up to you, Mom, whatever you'd like to do. So then she would go out and she would implement her decisions. And she'd come back 6 months later and say, David, you were right again. I did what I thought I should do, and I didn't follow what you suggested. And it turned out exactly the way you said it would. And I should have learned to listen to you by now. So sometimes your parents need to see that over and over and over again. And even still, when my mom knew that my advice was right on and accurate, she still would just do it a different way. And you just need to be okay with that and let go. All right, that's where you get to peacefulness. You share, you try to help, but if they're not interested in making those decisions, then so be it. They'll experience the results of whatever decisions they make. So this chapter here, chapter 4, is titled 3 Difficulties That Separate Mother and Son. So while this one, the Buddha is referring to mother and son, you could also think about this as mother and daughter, or father and son, or father and daughter as well. He just happens to be teaching based on these particular roles, but it applies to other roles as well. Here he says, monks, the uninstructed worldling speaks of these 3 difficulties that separate mother and son. What 3? There comes a time when a great wildfire arises. When the great wildfire has arisen, it burns up villages, towns, and cities. When villages, towns, and cities are burning up, the mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. This is the first difficulty that separates mother and son, of which the uninstructed worldling speaks. Again, there comes a time when a great rain cloud arises. When the great rain cloud has arisen, a great landslide takes place. When the great landslide takes place, villages, towns, and cities are swept away. When villages, towns, and cities are being swept away, the mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. This is the second difficulty that separates mother and son, of which the uninstructed worldling speaks. Again, there comes a time of a dangerous windstorm in the wilderness when the people of the countryside, mounted on their vehicles, flee on all sides. When there is a dangerous windstorm in the wilderness, The people of the countryside, mounted on their vehicles, are fleeing on all sides. The mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. This is the third difficulty that separates mother and son, of which the uninstructed worldling speaks. These are the three difficulties that separate mother and son, of which the uninstructed worldling speaks. There are, monks, these three difficulties when mother and son reconnect that the uninstructed worldling speaks of as difficulties that separate mother and son. What three? There comes a time when a great wildfire arises, when a great rain cloud arises, and there comes a time of a dangerous windstorm in the wilderness. There is sometimes an occasion when the mother finds her son and the son finds his mother. These are the three difficulties when mother and son reconnect that the uninstructed worldling speaks of as difficulties that separate mother and son. There are, monks, these three difficulties that separate mother and son. What three? The difficulty of old age, the difficulty of illness, and the difficulty of death. When the son is growing old, the mother cannot fulfill her wish. Let me grow old, but may my son not grow old. And when the mother is growing old, the son cannot fulfill his wish. Let me grow old, but may my mother not grow old. When the son has fallen ill, the mother cannot fulfill her wish. Let me fall ill, but may my son not fall ill. And when the mother has fallen ill, the son cannot fulfill his wish. Let me fall ill, but may my mother not fall ill. When the son is dying, the mother cannot fulfill her wish. Let me die, but may my son not die. And when the mother is dying, the son cannot fulfill his wish. Let me die, but may my mother not die. These are the three difficulties that separate mother and son. There is a path, monks. There is a way that leads to the abandoning and overcoming of these three difficulties when mother and son reconnect, and of these three difficulties that separate mother and son. And what is the path and the way? It is just this noble eightfold path that is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is the path and the way that leads to the abandoning and overcoming of these three difficulties when mother and son reconnect, and of these three difficulties that separate mother and son. Okay, so the Buddha is really honing in on the attachment that a child might have to a parent and a parent might have to a child. And he's talking here at the beginning of these three natural events that are occurring that could separate a parent and a child. And that this, of course, is very challenging because if there's attachment, the mind is going to have certain discontentedness based on that. Then he eventually gets to a point where he's talking about these other situations where a individual who is a parent or a child could have difficulties and struggle. It's when they see their parents growing old, having illness, or because of getting close to death. And the same thing is true when a parent sees their child getting old, having illness, or nearing death, that the individuals would really struggle and have discontentedness during this period of time. Well, the Buddha explains that there's a way to eliminate this. And the way to eliminate it is the Eightfold Path, because that's what's going to eliminate the discontentedness and the difficulties that are experienced during the time of the aging, sickness, and death. Whether it's you looking at your parents and having discontentedness due to that, or parents looking at a child and having discontentedness due to seeing that they're aging, they're sick, or they're dying. Because if you can eliminate craving, desire, attachment, you can eliminate the difficulties in the mind associated with these three experiences. Because you can understand that it's not possible to have permanent youthfulness. It's not possible to have permanent health. and it's not possible to have permanent life or existence. But as long as the mind is unaware of the universal truth of impermanence, and there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, then one is going to experience discontentedness. But training the mind through the Eightfold Path, you can eliminate that. You can abandon and overcome these three difficulties where the mind might have discontentedness associated with aging, sickness, and death of your parents or of your children. And this is the guidance here of the Buddha, is to learn and practice this Eightfold Path because it's a core central teaching that you would need in order to get to enlightenment. This is the path to enlightenment. This is your life practice. So you would need to know this inside and out, backwards and forwards, using the original words of the Buddha, which I share in all the courses, programs, retreats. I make sure that I teach the Eightfold Path because it's such a core central teaching. But if you haven't learned this with the original words of the Buddha, you might still be unclear about how to practice this Eightfold Path. So if you access the teachings that I share through Volume 1, Chapter 5, you'll be able to see the Eightfold Path in the words of the Buddha. And it's in other places in the book series, as well as the online classes, the retreats, the programs that I teach. I'm teaching this in one way or another because every student who aspires to get to enlightenment through the teachings of the Buddha would need to know this Eightfold Path based in the words of the Buddha, inside and out, backwards and forwards. You need to know it like the back of your hand. So any questions on this chapter, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So let me go ahead and move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 5. This is titled 4 Things Wished For, Desired, Agreeable, and Rarely Gained in the World. Here the Buddha shares, Householder, there are these 4 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. What for? 1 thinks, may wealth come to me righteously. This is the first thing in the world that is wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. Having gained wealth righteously, 1 thinks, may fame come to me and to my relatives and preceptors. This is the second thing in the world that is wished for, desired, agreeable, rarely gained in the world. Having gained wealth righteously, and having gained fame for oneself and for one's relatives and preceptors, 1 thinks, may I live long and enjoy a long lifespan. This is the third thing in the world that is wished for, desired, agreeable, rarely gained in the world. Having gained wealth righteously, having gained fame for oneself and for one's relatives and preceptors, living long and enjoying a long lifespan, 1 thinks, with the breakup of the body after death, may I be reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. This is the 4th thing in the world that is wished for, desired, agreeable, rarely gained in the world. These are the 4 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. There are, householder, 4 other things that lead to the obtaining those 4 things. What for? Accomplishment in confidence, accomplishment in virtuous behavior, accomplishment in generosity, and accomplishment in wisdom. Okay, so I'm just going to pause here for a moment and kind of make sure you guys are following along. So the Buddha is explaining that there's 4 things that an individual essentially is wanting in the world. There's wealth, fame, living a long life, and being reborn in the heavenly world. Well, the goal of the teachings of the Buddha aren't to be reborn in the heavenly world, as we talked at the beginning of the class. The goal is to get to enlightenment and escape the whole cycle of rebirth. But nonetheless, these are 4 things that human beings tend to oftentimes want in the world. And they're oftentimes wishing for it, desiring it, craving, desire, attachment to these types of things. Well, the Buddha is now going to explain to you, if it's those things that you're really interested in obtaining in the world, this is how you actually obtain it. But remember, the same things that lead to a rebirth in the heavenly world are the same things that lead to enlightenment as well. So the things that I'm going to share and that the Buddha is teaching here, these are the same things that you would like to practice in order to get to enlightenment. You're not interested in necessarily obtaining a heavenly rebirth, but instead learning and developing the mind and practicing to get to the point where you can get to enlightenment and escape the whole cycle of rebirth. So these things that he's sharing are very important for you to be able to accomplish that. So now he says, in what householder is accomplishment and confidence? Here, a noble disciple is endowed with confidence. He places confidence in the enlightenment of the Tathagata. Thus, the perfectly enlightened one is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate knower of the world, unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the perfectly enlightened one. This is called accomplishment and confidence. So in most places where you see the Buddha talking about confidence, he's referring to confidence in him, in his teachings, because in order to decide to investigate them and examine them, you would need to have some amount of confidence in him. And through investigating and examining them, and then independently reflecting to verify them, and then practicing them, as you see the improvement to the condition of the mind, where it's becoming more peaceful and joyful, your confidence will only grow in the teachings, in the Buddha, and also the community that you're part of. So having confidence is an important thing to get to enlightenment. And you may not have confidence when you first get started, but as you investigate the teachings and you see the improvement to the mind, as you're independently verifying his teachings, your confidence can build, and more you can eliminate doubt. And what is accomplishment in virtuous behavior? Here, a noble disciple abstains from the destruction of life, abstains from taking what is not given, abstains from sexual misconduct, abstains from false speech, abstains from liquor, wine, and intoxicants, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. This is called accomplishment in virtuous behavior. So here again, he's pointing to the 5 precepts, where if you look at the words of the Buddha in the 5 precepts, he has much more illuminating language. Here he's just summarizing it and pointing to it. But if you look in volume 1, chapter 7 of the book series that I share, you'll see the original words of the Buddha on the 5 precepts, because he gives much more illuminating language to be able to help you understand how to practice the 5 precepts. And that's what you would need in order to make your way to enlightenment. Because as long as you're practicing unvirtuous or unskillful behavior, you're causing harm in the world, and then harm is coming back to you. So by improving your moral conduct, you now are causing less and less harm in the world, and then you'll see less and less unwholesome things coming back to you. How would you be able to get to this peaceful and joyful mind in life if you're causing harm and harm keeps coming back to you? So the 5 precepts are a baseline minimum around virtuous behavior or moral conduct, but there's much more details that the Buddha shares on this in like the Eightfold Path under right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then there's connecting teachings that connect into that you would like to learn and develop as part of your growth and development on the path to enlightenment. In these book series and these courses and programs and retreats that I share all of that with you, but this is a baseline minimum to get to accomplishment in virtuous behavior, is to now practice this virtuous behavior. That's what's going to lead to improved wealth, that you are able to then experience potentially fame or long life or this rebirth in the heavenly world. And then he talks about accomplishment in generosity. And what is accomplishment in generosity? Here, a noble disciple resides at home with a mind free from the stain of selfishness, freely generous, open-handed, joyful in relinquishment, devoted to charity, joyful in giving and sharing. This is called accomplishment in generosity. Because remember, generosity is there to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment. If you're looking to build wealth and build fame and build a long life and also an improved rebirth, you're going to need to get to the point where you're practicing generosity, where you're reducing and eliminating your craving, desire, attachment. When you have craving, desire, attachment in the mind, then the mind is longing, yearning. There's a lot of stress or frustration or anguish in the mind. This puts a burden on the body. And now the physical body, the heart is not as strong, the lungs aren't as strong, the other organs aren't working as well. But when you can free the mind of discontentedness, now the body doesn't have to work as hard and you'll experience a longer life. So practicing generosity is helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment so that you can experience a long life. Think about the Buddha. He lived until the age of 80. This is 2,500 years ago. I don't know what the average lifespan was back then, but I'm almost confident that it wasn't the age of 80. It was probably much less, maybe in the 30s or 40s. But here's an individual who lived all the way to the age of 80 back in those time frames when old age wasn't necessarily very common. So by freeing the mind, by getting to enlightenment, and now your mind can be peaceful and tranquil and joyful, you'll notice that you'll have a longer life. The way to get to the peace, tranquility, and joy is to practice elimination of craving, desire, attachment through breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and practicing generosity of giving and sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources without any expectation of anything in return. And then lastly, the Buddha shares, and what is accomplishment in wisdom? If one dwells with a mind overcome by longing and unrighteous sensual desires, one does what should be avoided and neglects one's duties so that one's fame and peacefulness are spoiled. So he says the same thing here about ill will, complacency, restlessness and worry, and he also refers to it as doubt. These are what's called the 5 hindrances, that these 5 hindrances are obstructions to your enlightenment. These are pollutions of mind or defilements which will hinder you from being able to get to your peacefulness and these other things that an individual might be longing and yearning for, which is wealth, fame, the long life, and an improved rebirth. So then the Buddha is explaining that when a noble disciple has eliminated these things, when you eliminate the longing and the yearning with sensual desires, when you eliminate the ill will, you eliminate the complacency, you eliminate the restlessness and worry, and you eliminate the doubt, you've eliminated these 5 hindrances, then having eliminated it, this is where, having abandoned it, now an individual will experience more peace and more joy in their mind. There's more pollutions in mind than just the 5 hindrances or these obstructions, but you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment as long as these obstructions are there in the mind. And I teach you what these are in detail and the antidotes or solutions or remedies of how to eliminate them. I teach these in other classes in the books. So if you would like to reference the online classes where I've taught these, you can go to the YouTube channel and you'll be able to search for the 5 hindrances, and you'll see that I've taught this, exactly what they are and how to eliminate them. And then of course the Buddha sums it up with telling you what he told you, right? So that's a common way that he would teach. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. I think you guys know how to ask those questions by putting them into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. So I don't see any questions here. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 6, 9 things rooted in craving. Here, the Buddha's teaching, I will teach you, monks, 9 things rooted in craving. What are the 9 things rooted in craving? Independence on craving, there is seeking. Independence on seeking, there is gain. On dependence on gain, there is judgment. Independence on judgment, there is desire and lust. Independence on desire and lust, there is attachment. Independence on attachment, there is possessiveness. Independence on possessiveness, there is selfishness. Independence on selfishness, there is safeguarding. With safeguarding as the foundation, originate the taking up of rods and weapons, fights, contentions, and disputes, accusations, argumentative speech, and false speech, and many other evil, unwholesome things. These are the 9 things rooted in craving. So the teachings of the Buddha are based around the defilements or the taints or the pollutions and eliminating those from the mind. One of the significant ones that you're working to eliminate is craving, desire, attachment, this mental longing and strong eagerness. And that's what's leading to discontentedness. But because an individual has craving in their mind, not only is it leading to discontentedness, but it's leading to a lot of unwise decisions that then produce unwholesome results. So the Buddha here is kind of a master at showing you this cause and effect, or this action and result, this causality of how one thing leads to another, and then that thing leads to another, and then that thing leads to another. So here he's taking craving, which he teaches all throughout his teachings, And he's explaining that that then leads to seeking, which is seeking things outside of yourself. And now when you're doing that, that's going to lead to gain. You're going to gain certain things in the world, certain material possessions. And then when you have certain material possessions, that's going to lead to you judging other people, determining, do they have more than me or do they have less than me? And now if you notice that people have more than you, this is going to lead to desire and lust, where you're longing, yearning for more and more things. And then this is going to lead to attachment or clinging, where you hold on to things very tightly. And now that's going to lead to this possessiveness, where you're holding on to things. And then there's this selfishness, where you're unwilling to share. And now it leads to this safeguarding, where you're guarding all the things that you have, not wanting to lose anything. And now because of this leads to this taking up of weapons, where now there's fights, contentions, disputes, accusations, argumentative speech, and false speech, and other unwholesome things. So craving, yes, it leads to discontentedness, but it leads to a lot of unwise decision making, like what the Buddha is describing here. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter, 9 things rooted in craving. All right, I'm not seeing anything here. So let me move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 7. This one is titled, Indebtedness is Discontentedness in the World. Monks, isn't poverty discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? If a poor, impoverished, needy person gets into debt, isn't his indebtedness too discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? If a poor, impoverished, needy person who has gotten into debt promises to pay interest, isn't the interest too discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? If a poor, impoverished, needy person who has promised to pay interest cannot pay it when it falls due, they admonish him. Isn't being admonished too discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? If a poor, impoverished, needy person who is admonished does not pay, they prosecute him. Isn't prosecution too discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? If a poor, impoverished, needy person who is prosecuted does not pay, they imprison him. Isn't imprisonment too discontentedness in the world for one who enjoys sensual pleasures? So, monks, for one who enjoys sensual pleasures, poverty is discontentedness in the world. Getting into debt is discontentedness in the world. Having to pay interest is discontentedness in the world. Being admonished is discontentedness in the world. Prosecution is discontentedness in the world. And imprisonment is discontentedness in the world. So too, monks, when one does not have confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have energy in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities, in the noble one's discipline, one is called a poor, impoverished, needy person. So let me pause here for a bit and explain this, because this is the real crux of this discourse. The Buddha is talking about an individual getting into debt is discontentedness, because getting into debt is that you have a lot of craving of certain things that you want in some cases, and now you can't afford those things, but you're going into debt. So you're kind of enjoying yourself with all these sensual pleasures, but you're actually harming yourself because you're going into debt, and your life is kind of upside down in this case. So here the Buddha is explaining that the same thing is true if you're not having confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities, if you don't have this moral wrongdoing. What moral wrongdoing is knowing what's wholesome and unwholesome, or wise and unwise. What moral concern is this is having the concern to not do unwholesome and unwise things. So if you don't have these qualities, the Buddha is essentially saying you're going into debt, because as you produce more and more unwholesomeness through unwise decision making, you're going to have to experience that unwholesome karma. It's going to come back to you, either in this life or some future life. So by you continuing to lack wisdom and not knowing wholesome and unwholesome, or wise and unwise, and not having a concern to do unwise things and unwholesome things, you're going to continue to go into debt. And also the Buddha talks about here one that does not have energy, like motivation, encouragement, the ambition or initiative to do what is wise and wholesome. And then when one doesn't have wisdom about wholesome qualities, it's the same thing. This person is becoming indebted. They're impoverished and a needy person. And then the Buddha is going on more and more and explaining all of that here. I'm just going to kind of move through this rather than reading it all. There's a lot of detail here that you can read. He talks about by not having these qualities that an individual at the time of death, because of their misconduct by body, speech, and mind, can be born into the hell realm or the animal realm. And he refers to them as prisons because once you get into those realms, it's very hard to get back out. We've all been in those realms at different times, pretty much at one time or another. So now we're out. We're out of those lower realms. We've escaped that prison, and now we have the ability to cultivate the mind. But oftentimes an individual is complacent, which is one of those hindrances where the mind lacks ambition and initiative to be willing to actually learn and practice because there's a certain amount of work that is involved there. So then he goes on and just kind of explains more. You guys can read this as part of the book. His words are very important, and if you guys are reading this on your own, you'll be able to learn more and more about this. But me being able to read all this in one class is just kind of a bit much. So I'd like to just open up the questions that you guys have related to what the Buddha is teaching here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 8. And again, I'm not going to be able to read this whole chapter, but I'll explain to you what the Buddha is teaching. This is titled Welfare and Peacefulness in This Present Life. He's talking to a individual who's asking him questions. This person says, "Venerable Sir, we are householders enjoying sensual pleasures, living at home in a house full of children. We use sandalwood from Kasi. We wear garlands, scents, and ointments. We receive gold and silver. Let the perfectly enlightened one teach us the teachings in a way that will lead to our welfare and peacefulness in this present life and in future lives." So here, this householder is asking, what is it that will lead to our peacefulness in this life? And now the Buddha provides these 4 teachings of what's going to lead to peacefulness: accomplishment in initiative, accomplishment in protection, wholesome friendship, and balanced living. So here, accomplishment and initiative is having the initiative to apply yourself skillfully and diligently in your career. Whatever career or livelihood that you take, it's wise to apply wise decision making there and be able to essentially carry out your duties in that role and responsibility to be able to build your career. The next thing he talks about is protection, that you ensure that you protect your wealth. In terms like nowadays, we might kind of get insurance or put it in a bank or have certain protected investments or things like that. Not the safeguarding that he was talking about before where you're guarding it with weapons, but instead that you put it away in a place that is well protected. The Buddha talks about preventing kings and thieves from taking it, fire, floods, and displeasing airs. These are things like you might think of kings nowadays, you might think about the government, whereas if you didn't pay your taxes, they could come in and take a lot of your wealth. So be sure that you regularly pay your taxes and be sure you guard your wealth from thieves. That's by putting it into bank accounts or protected investments or having insurance or things like that. Same thing with fires and floods, that would be protected through insurance if you might decide to use that type of service. What displeasing airs are, this is like if you had a will that you created and then you didn't tell anybody about it, then when you died, then people could be displeased. Whereas if you left money to certain people in your life, but then you let them know what you're leaving them before you died, then if they had any questions for you, you could answer those questions before you died, so they wouldn't be displeased by the time you die. And then having wholesome friendships, this is going to lead to your peacefulness. If you have unwholesome friends, then this is going to cause difficulties in your life because you're going to be influenced and affected by their unwise decisions. So here the Buddha is giving you some guidance on that. And he does this in other discourses as well about how to cultivate wholesome friends. Then he talks about this balanced living. He talks about that your income should be higher than your expenses. Whereas if your expenses are higher than your income, you're kind of living life upside down and you're constantly going into debt. And you're going to need to be able to repay this debt. So by ensuring that your income is a certain level and your expenses are below that, this allows you to live a balanced life. Whereas if you have a lot of craving, it's very expensive to chase your cravings, and this might take you into debt. So it would be wise to arrange your income and expenditures so that you're not going into debt, but instead that you can maintain a comfortable lifestyle. Because as long as you're going into debt, this is going to burden the mind, stress the mind, and produce anxiety because the mind's having all this craving. So by you choosing to live a balanced life, you can reduce that pressure and that stress, and now you'll have a longer life because your mind is tranquil and the body is tranquil. You're not putting all this work on the body. So that's this particular chapter. Any questions here? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 9. Here, this is titled 4 Sources of Depletion and Accumulation of the Wealth. So here the Buddha is going to teach you 4 things that lead to depletion of your wealth and 4 things that lead to the accumulation of your wealth. And again, I'll just summarize it for you. You can read this in the book, Volume 8, Chapter 9. Okay? So here the Buddha is explaining womanizing, drunkenness, gambling, and unwholesome friendship is what's going to lead to the depletion of your wealth. What womanizing would be, and remember he's speaking to a man here, this is the student that's asking him a question. What womanizing would be to chase around multiple partners and just spending your money frivolously, trying to chase around and having casual sex with lots of different people. And a woman could potentially do this with women, or a woman could do this with men too. So womanizing here, he's talking to a man who must be having a life partner or chasing after women that could potentially be doing that kind of thing. So the Buddha is using this term womanizing, but you can apply this to chasing after anybody and constantly chasing people wanting to have casual sex. This is very expensive. Whereas if you had a loyal, committed relationship, you guys could build your life together and build wealth. Drunkenness or heedlessness, this is going to lead to the depletion of wealth because you're just spending money in order to get heedless. It's not producing any real benefit in your life. And now with your mind being heedless, you're going to make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. Gambling is another one. Gambling is using your money and your resources, your income, to try to play a game of chance, and now for the hopes of winning some more money. But oftentimes people get addicted to this and it's a downward spiral. It's going to deplete your wealth. And then same thing with unwholesome friends. If you have friends who are into unwholesome things, they're going to have all kinds of unwise decision making that leads to difficulties in their life. And now they might be asking you, can you come bail me out of jail? Can you pay for my lawyer? Can you fix my house? Can you fix my car? All these different things. So this is going to lead to the depletion of your wealth. And then the Buddha talks about accumulation of wealth is avoiding these 4 things. So by avoiding these 4 things, that's what's going to lead to the accumulation of your wealth, because you're not going to have this outflow. There's another discourse that the Buddha shares where he talks about this flowing of water, and he talks about womanizing, drunkenness, gambling, and having unwholesome friends. It's like opening up these outlets, and the water is just free flowing out. But by you choosing not to do these things, it's closing the outlets. Actually, it's right here. You can see it where he's talking about closing these outlets. And now you're preserving the resources that you have because you're not just allowing them to flow out freely through womanizing, drunkenness, gambling, or having unwholesome friends. So let me know what questions you guys have here. And again, I recommend that you guys read these because you got the teachings of the Buddha in his words, and you've got words from me to be able to help you there as well. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll move on to the 10th chapter here, the very last one, which is 4 things leading to the welfare and peacefulness in future lives. And these are all things that we've actually already studied. So the same things that lead to welfare and peacefulness in the future life is the same thing that's going to lead to welfare and peacefulness in this life and helping you to get to enlightenment. And it's these same 4 things that we've studied in the previous discourse, which is developing confidence, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom. And the Buddha is explaining that in the exact same way that he did in the previous discourse. So let me see what questions you guys have on this or anything else that you guys would like to ask questions on. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I will answer your questions for you. Okay, let's see. I'm not seeing any questions in Zoom. Not seeing any in Facebook or YouTube either. So you guys must be understanding these to a certain degree, or maybe you need to go back and read these and study these more closely. In our next class on Saturday, we're going to be in chapters 11 through 20 of this same book, Volume 8, The Foremost Householders. So if you'd like to study those before class or after class, and then come to class to be able to get help. This is more of a study group versus me just teaching. So if you decide that you would like to study these prior to class, then you can come to class and get help. Or if you'd like to just come here and study as part of our class, you can do that as well. Tomorrow in our group learning program at the temple and here through live streaming, now that I'm live streaming the morning class and the evening class, I'm going to be teaching chapter 1 of the group learning program. So volume 1, chapter 1, we're going to be starting from the very beginning of the book. This is titled Universal Teachings, Love, No Harm, and Good Morals. This is where you're going to learn about these universal teachings that really apply across all traditions, whether it's Christianity, Muslim teachings, Hindu, or other teachings, even Buddhism. You'll see these common theme amongst all the teachings that exist in the world. And I'm going to help you to see some of those connections and help you learn how you can use these universal teachings of love, no harm, and good morals to benefit you in developing your life practice. And then on Wednesday, we'll be in part 2 of our 4-part series on loving kindness meditation. So you're welcome to attend that or listen to any of the replays or watch any of the replays based on the teachings that I'm sharing that are based in the words of the Buddha. So thank you all for your interest to learn and practice the teachings. Thank you for your questions. We'll see you guys in a future class. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.